The void was silent, but not peaceful. It was a silence born of death, of civilizations reduced to drifting wreckage and forgotten echoes. What had once been the most powerful fleet in the galaxy now hung in pieces, its ships broken, burning, or frozen in the eternal cold of space. The great warships that had once carried entire battalions of warriors across the stars were nothing more than floating carcasses, their hulls torn open by weapons that moved faster than thought, that cut through shields as if they were paper. Escape pods drifted aimlessly, their emergency beacons long since extinguished, their occupants lost to the void. No messages, no survivors, no help, just silence. For thousands of years, the Galactic Concord had been the unbreakable foundation of interstellar order. Different species, once divided by war and mistrust, had come together to build a galaxy where peace was more than a fleeting dream. They had constructed vast cities on planets that had once been barren, established trade routes that spanned the stars, and quelled conflicts before they could erupt into full-scale devastation. Their unity had been their strength, their diversity their weapon. But now, that unity was ash. The Concord was gone, its last fleets wiped out in a matter of days. Every world they had once protected had been consumed by fire. The strongest civilizations, the oldest empires, all had fallen before the Nullborn. No one knew what the Nullborn was. Some called them demons, ancient horrors that had waited in the dark for their moment to strike. Others believed they were machines, cold, unfeeling constructs that had no purpose beyond destruction. But the truth was unknown, buried beneath the weight of their endless war. They did not speak. They did not negotiate. They did not ask for surrender. They only came, and they only destroyed. Their weapons moved with a precision that defied logic, their ships appearing and vanishing as if they were ghosts. And worst of all, they never left survivors. The galaxy had become a graveyard. Those who remained lived in fear, hiding in the darkest systems, powering down their ships, and praying that the Nullborn would not find them. But hope was a fragile thing, and in the void, it was nearly extinct. Then, in the depths of a dead solar system, on a cold meteor base buried in the ruins of a forgotten war, a signal reached them. A soft, rhythmic beep echoed through the chamber, ancient, broken, and weak, but still repeating. Still alive. The commander, a reptilian officer with sharp, calculating eyes, stared at the console. "Is that real?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The insectoid engineer, his antennae twitching with uncertainty, nodded slowly. "Yes, it's old. Very old. It's been repeating for centuries, maybe longer. It's coming from a small blue planet. Records call it Earth." The room fell into silence. Some whispered in disbelief. Others argued, questioning the wisdom of chasing a signal from a world long thought destroyed. Some feared the signal was a trap. Others feared that the humans, if they even existed, might be worse than the Nullborn themselves. The commander, Virix, did not speak for a long time. She had heard the stories, whispers of a species that had once waged war against itself, that had nearly torn itself apart before the Concord had risen. But when they stood together, nothing could stop them. She looked at the flickering transmission, weak but unbroken. "If the stories are true," she said finally, "then the humans were the only species even the old empires feared. Maybe they died, maybe they didn't. But maybe, just maybe, they're the monsters we need." A day later, the Phantom Blade left the meteor base, its engines cold, its lights dimmed. It flew toward the lost regions, toward a small yellow star and a blue planet that had been lost to time. The galaxy had no allies left, no weapons strong enough to fight back. But somewhere, in the ruins of a world thought extinct, the signal remained. And Virix was going to answer it. The Phantom Blade drifted through the void, its sensors locked onto the ancient transmission. The signal was faint and fragmented, but it pulsed with an unrelenting rhythm, as if it had been waiting for someone to hear it. For centuries, perhaps millennia, it had repeated, unchanging, unyielding. The insectoid engineer adjusted the frequency, his mandibles clicking nervously as he analyzed the data. "It's real," he muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. "This signal has been broadcasting for an unfathomable amount of time. It's coming from a planet in the Sol system, Earth." Virix turned sharply, her tail flicking with unease. "Earth," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The name was a relic, a story told in the oldest archives, a world that had existed before even the first Concord. Some said it had been destroyed in its own wars, before the galaxy had ever known it. Others believed it had simply vanished, lost to time, its people either extinct or too primitive to matter. But now, here it was, alive, still calling out. Her officers gathered around the console, their expressions ranging from skepticism to fear. One of them, a towering amphibian with webbed fingers and a voice like rolling thunder, scoffed. "That's just a myth. No one survived the collapse. If they did, they wouldn't have lasted this long." Another, a being of shifting crystalline form, spoke in a voice like wind through broken glass. "Even if they survived, they would be nothing compared to the Nullborn. Their weapons were primitive. Their ships were weak. If they tried to fight, they would be wiped out in moments." Virix remained silent for a long time, her sharp, reptilian eyes scanning the signal. She had heard the old stories, whispered in the ruins of fallen worlds, of a species that had once fought wars over dust, over words, over nothing at all. They had torn themselves apart, their own history filled with blood and fire. But when they stood together, nothing had been able to stop them. The Concord had feared them. The old empires had feared them. And then, they had vanished. She turned to her crew, her voice steady. "We have no allies. We have no weapons strong enough to fight them. We have no hope." She pointed to the screen. Except that, a murmur of uncertainty spread through the chamber. Some argued that Earth was a lost cause, that they would find nothing but ruins and ghosts. Others feared the signal itself. What if it was a trap? What if the humans had become something even worse than the Nullborn? Virix met their gazes, her expression unreadable. If the stories are true, they were the only species the old empires feared. If they are still there, they may be the only ones who can stand against the Nullborn. Her second officer, a heavy-set quadruped with a voice like a growl, stepped forward. "You would risk everything on a whisper." She nodded slowly. "If the Nullborn finds us first, we die anyway. This is our only chance." The insectoid engineer hesitated. "What if they don't want to help us?" Virix turned back to the console, watching the flickering signal. "Then we find out if they are worse than the Nullborn." Within hours, the Phantom Blade was ready. The insectoid engineer made final adjustments, ensuring the ship's stealth systems were active and its engines were running cold. Virix stepped onto the bridge, her officers falling into line behind her. The stars stretched before them, vast and indifferent. She turned to her crew. "This is not a mission of conquest. It's not a mission of diplomacy. It's a mission of desperation." She looked at each of them in turn. "If the humans are gone, then we die searching. But if they are still out there, if they are still what the legends claim, then maybe, just maybe, they are the monsters we need." With that, the Phantom Blade powered up its engines, leaving the meteor base behind. The ship vanished into the void, its course set for Earth. The Phantom Blade descended toward Earth's orbit, its stealth systems engaged, its engines running cold. The crew remained tense, their eyes locked on the scanners, waiting for signs of movement, for any indication that they were not alone in this forgotten world. But the only signal they received was the same one that had drawn them here, steady, unwavering, ancient. Then, without warning, the ship's lights flickered. The engines stuttered. A voice, calm and sharp, echoed through the comms. "Unidentified vessel. You are entering restricted Terran space. Identify yourself, or you will be fired upon." The crew froze. The voice was unmistakably human. Not a relic from the past, not a ghost of history. It was here, now, and utterly unyielding. Virix activated the comm. "This is Commander Virix of the Phantom Blade. We are survivors of the Galactic Concord. We come in peace. We seek help." A pause. Then the voice returned. "Transmitting docking codes. Follow the beacon. Any attempt to divert will be seen as a threat." The channel closed. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. No welcome. No questions. Just orders. They followed the beacon, guided toward an unseen location above Earth. As they neared orbit, the void shifted. A massive shape, black and silent, shimmered into view. A stealth station. It had been there all along, invisible, until they were close enough to see it. The Phantom Blade was caught in a gravity tether and pulled toward its hangar. Inside, the lights flickered on as the ship touched down. The doors hissed open, and they stepped out, met by a sight that sent a chill through their spines. Humans. They stood tall, clad in dark, unmarked uniforms, their faces unreadable, their eyes cold. Weapons were holstered, but they did not need to be drawn. There was no need for threats when the message was clear. A woman stepped forward, her hair streaked with gray, her voice like tempered steel. "I am Commander Soren. You said you seek help. Speak." Virix swallowed hard. The legends had spoken of humanity's resilience, of their ability to rise from the ashes of their own destruction. Now, standing before them, she realized the truth was far more terrifying. These were not desperate survivors. These were something else entirely. The insectoid engineer adjusted his antennae nervously. "They were watching the war," he whispered. "They knew everything." Virix turned to Soren. "Then why didn't you help before?" Soren's gaze did not waver. "Because we needed to be sure. We needed to see if the galaxy still had the will to fight." She gestured toward the war room beyond. "You've seen what we can do. Now, you're going to learn why we fight the way we do." The crew followed her through the corridors of the station, their footsteps echoing against the cold metal. The war room was filled with holographic displays, showing Nullborn movements, battle simulations, and human strike patterns. The humans had not been idle. They had been waiting, watching. Virix looked at the maps, at the suggested targets. "You're not just fighting back," she realized. "You're teaching the galaxy how to fight." Soren's lips curled into the faintest smirk. "The galaxy has been afraid of the Nullborn for too long. We're going to remind them that fear cuts both ways." The war room was silent for a moment. Then Virix exhaled. "Tell me what you need from us." Soren's smirk widened. "Then listen closely. Operation Silence is about to begin." The briefing was swift, almost dismissive. Commander Soren and her officers outlined the mission with cold efficiency, their expressions betraying no hesitation. The target, a Nullborn-controlled planet, Rykos 7, a once thriving world now reduced to a wasteland of scorched ruins and silent cities. The Nullborn had established a stronghold there, using the planet as a staging ground for further incursions. The humans would not be launching a full-scale assault. Instead, a single squad would be deployed alongside Virix's crew to conduct a reconnaissance mission, one that would serve as both a test and a warning. The Phantom Blade departed Earth's orbit, its course set for the war-torn system. The humans aboard the ship remained silent, moving with practiced precision, their gear meticulously checked, their weapons cleaned with an almost ritualistic care. They spoke only when necessary, their words clipped and devoid of emotion. Virix observed them, noting the way they carried themselves, not like soldiers, but like predators. As they neared Rykos 7, the ship's sensors detected Nullborn patrol vessels sweeping the planet's surface, their dark, jagged forms gliding through the atmosphere like wraiths. The humans barely reacted. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, simply adjusted his helmet and turned to Virix. "We drop in 20 minutes. Stay out of our way." The Phantom Blade entered the upper atmosphere, its stealth systems engaged. The ship descended into the ruins of a collapsed city, landing in a shattered structure that once housed a marketplace. The humans disembarked first, their boots crunching against the debris. They moved without hesitation, their formation tight, their movements fluid. Virex and her crew followed, weapons drawn, eyes scanning for threats. Then the Nullborn arrived. A squad of their warriors emerged from the shadows, their armored forms sleek and menacing, their weapons humming with lethal energy. They moved with their usual brutality: ambush, suppress, eliminate. But the humans did not retreat. They did not flinch. The first Nullborn warrior fired. A bolt of energy struck the ground where the tall man had been standing seconds before. He had already moved, pivoting with unnatural speed, his rifle spitting bursts of fire that tore through the enemy's armor. The others moved like shadows, their strikes precise, their movements calculated. Virex's crew barely had time to react before the battlefield was already shifting. One of the insectoid officers turned to her, his mandibles clicking in alarm. They're not just fighting, they're predicting them. It was true. The humans anticipated every maneuver, every ambush. They did not just counter the Nullborn, they forced them into kill zones, luring them into traps with deceptive retreats and sudden, brutal counterattacks. Within minutes, the Nullborn squad was decimated. Their bodies sprawled across the wreckage, their weapons still warm from the brief exchange. Virex stepped forward, her breath shallow. The humans stood in silence, their breathing steady, their weapons still in hand. One of them, a woman with piercing green eyes, wiped blood from her blade with a slow, practiced motion. 12 minutes, she muttered. They took longer than last time. The insectoid officer looked at her, his voice trembling. You knew how to fight them." The woman turned, her expression unreadable. "We were built for worse." The battle had been swift, but the implications were staggering. The Nullborn were relentless, unpredictable, and deadly. No force had ever countered them so effortlessly. And yet, these humans had done more than fight. They had dismantled their enemies with a precision that bordered on terrifying. Virex's second officer, a massive amphibian with webbed fingers, exhaled sharply. "They're not soldiers," he whispered. "They're hunters." The humans said nothing. They simply cleaned their weapons, reloaded their gear, and prepared for the next mission. As the phantom blade lifted off, leaving the battlefield behind, Virex knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had changed. The Nullborn had been unstoppable for too long. But now the darkness had something else to fear. The phantom blade returned to Earth's hidden station, its hull still bearing the scars of the battle on Ryko 7. As the ship settled into the hangar, Virex and her officers followed the human squad through the dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing against the cold metal floors. The station was a fortress of silence, its halls lined with terminals displaying shifting maps of the galaxy, some blinking with red indicators, Nullborn-controlled systems. Others flickered with yellow, warning of imminent attacks. But one system, Earth's, remained a steady green. Commander Soren led them into the war room, a circular chamber filled with holographic projections of enemy movements, fleet deployments, and planetary defenses. At the center, a massive display showed the Nullborn's expansion, their dark tendrils stretching across the stars. The alien officers gathered around the table, their expressions a mixture of awe and apprehension. "You came here seeking help," Soren said, her voice cutting through the silence. "But we've been watching the war for a long time. We let it play out. We wanted to see if the galaxy still had the will to fight." She gestured toward the holograms. "You say the Nullborn are unstoppable, but you're wrong. They have weaknesses. They just haven't met anything that can exploit them." Virex narrowed her reptilian eyes. "Then why didn't you intervene before? If you knew, if you had the strength." Soren turned to her, her expression unreadable. "Because we needed to be sure. We needed to see if the galaxy was worth saving." She tapped a control, and the holograms shifted. "We watched as species fell one by one. We watched as the Concord crumbled. We watched as entire worlds burned. But we also watched the survivors. How they hid, how they surrendered, and how they waited for someone else to act." She let the words settle. "We don't fight for the helpless. We fight for those who refuse to die. Virix clenched her jaw. And now? Soren's smirk was barely visible. Now, you've seen what we can do. You've seen how we move, how we strike. The Nullborn will come for you next, just as they will come for us. But this time, we won't wait for them to reach our doorstep. She stepped forward, pressing a button that brought up a new set of coordinates. We have a plan. We're not just fighting back, we're teaching the galaxy how to fight. The insectoid engineer leaned over the table, his antennae twitching. How? Soren's gaze was unwavering. We use their tactics against them. The Nullborn strike fast. They take what they want, and they vanish before retaliation. So do we. She gestured toward the human squad standing silently behind her. We don't fight like the Concord did. We don't wait for fleets to assemble. We strike where they're weakest, where they least expect it. We don't just take out their forces, we break their morale. Virix studied the holographic maps, the suggested targets. The Nullborn had always moved in overwhelming force, crushing resistance before it could form. But Soren's strategy was different. They weren't going after the front lines. They were targeting the supply chains, the command nodes, and the hidden outposts. The human plan wasn't about winning battles. It was about making the Nullborn fear every moment of their existence. The corridors of the underground facility stretched endlessly, their walls reinforced with thick, blackened steel that absorbed every flicker of light. Virix followed Soren through the dim passage, the silence pressing against her like a tangible force. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, the hum of distant machinery replaced by an oppressive stillness. The station was not meant to be found. Finally, Soren stopped before a reinforced door, scanning her hand against a biometric panel. The locks disengaged with a hiss, and the door slid open to reveal a vast chamber beyond. Virix stepped inside, her breath catching. The room was a training pit, its walls lined with observation terminals and weapon racks. But the focus was not on machines or simulations, it was on the humans within. Dozens of children, no older than 10, moved in perfect unison across the floor, their bodies a blur of motion as they engaged in brutal sparring sessions. They wore dark training suits, their faces marked with sweat and blood, but none of them showed pain. None of them faltered. Virix's eyes widened as she watched two boys lock in combat, their strikes precise, their movements eerily synchronized. They wielded wooden staffs, yet each blow was calculated, each dodge executed with unnatural efficiency. The training was not just physical, it was mental, tactical, and ingrained into their very being. Soren stepped beside her, her voice quiet. This is the Aegis Protocol. She gestured toward the children. We don't just train soldiers, we build warriors. Virix turned to her, her mind struggling to grasp what she was seeing. You're telling me these are just children? Soren nodded. They were born into this. From the moment they could walk, they were taught to fight, to survive, and to adapt. They don't just learn tactics, they become them. They don't just memorize combat drills, they live them. She pointed to a group of children practicing evasive maneuvers. They can predict movement before it happens. They anticipate threats before they manifest. Virix watched as one of the boys was knocked to the ground, blood dripping from his nose. Instead of crying out, he simply grinned, wiping the crimson from his face before rising back into a defensive stance. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation, only focus. She turned to Soren, her voice tight. You're breeding them for war. Soren's expression didn't change. We prepare them for survival. She walked forward, gesturing to the observation deck above. The galaxy thinks we are monsters because we fight without mercy. But they forget. We were once the ones on the brink of extinction. We were the ones who lost everything. And when we rose from the ashes, we made a promise. Never again. Virix's tail twitched. And what happens when the Nullborn are gone, when the war is over? Soren's gaze was unwavering. Then we ensure that nothing like them rises again. She looked back at the children. their movements flawless, their discipline absolute. These were not recruits. These were not conscripts. These were something else entirely. Something the galaxy had never seen before. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Virix felt a shiver crawl down her spine. The Nullborn had been the terror of the stars, an unstoppable force that had crushed entire civilizations. But now, standing in the heart of humanity's hidden fortress, she realized the truth. The Nullborn had been the nightmare. But the humans, they had been the nightmare's makers. The war chamber of the Nullborn's command hive was a place of unyielding silence, broken only by the flickering red glow of their leaders' bioluminescent forms. The towering figure of the Nullborn commander, its obsidian limbs pulsing with dark energy, stood motionless as holographic projections displayed the growing losses. The Oblivion core had been destroyed. Patrols had vanished without a trace. Outposts had been reduced to smoldering ruins. The humans were not just fighting back. They were dismantling the Nullborn's empire with an efficiency that defied logic. A war strategist, its body a shifting amalgamation of metal and pulsing flesh, stepped forward. They do not fight like the Concord. They do not rely on overwhelming force. Their tactics are unconventional, their movements unpredictable. They do not just destroy, they terrify. The Nullborn commander's claws scraped against the stone floor. Then we must break them. A new operation was devised. The Nullborn would capture a rebel faction, one of the last holdouts in the outer systems, and use them as bait. The humans had been drawn in by desperation before. Perhaps they would fall for the same trick again. The trap was set on a shattered moon orbiting a dead gas giant, where the rebels had taken refuge. The Nullborn surrounded them, their forces hidden in the ruins, their weapons primed. When the humans arrived, they did so without fanfare. A single matte black vessel, no larger than a dropship, emerged from the void, its silhouette barely visible against the darkness. No transmissions, no warnings, just a silent approach. As the ship descended, 4 figures disembarked, moving with the same eerie efficiency as before. The rebels, battered and exhausted, expected salvation. Instead, the humans did not speak. They did not reassure. They simply moved. Then the trap was sprung. The Nullborn descended in waves, their weapons spitting death. The rebels screamed, scattering as the ambush unfolded. But the humans did not run. They did not retreat. They turned toward the Nullborn and smiled. The battle was over before the rebels could even understand what had happened. The humans moved like wraiths, cutting through the ambush with brutal efficiency. Every Nullborn warrior that had come for them was dead within minutes, their bodies sprawled across the moon's surface. The rebels stood frozen, watching as the humans retrieved their gear, their expressions unreadable. Then, before they left, they carved a message into the steel walls of the rebels' stronghold. The words were simple. The humans are awake. The phrase spread like wildfire. Across the stars, on forgotten worlds and hidden stations, the message was repeated. The humans were real. They were not myths. They had not been erased. They were coming. On the edge of the galaxy, alien refugees gathered around broken radios, hearing the signal for the first time. In the ruins of once great cities, survivors whispered the words to each other, their voices filled with both hope and dread. Even the Nullborn themselves, their command hives filled with panic, began to question their invincibility. The tide was turning. The galaxy had been broken by fear, by the belief that resistance was futile. But now, that fear was shifting. Not away from the Nullborn, but toward the humans. The legends had spoken of a species that had once waged war against itself, that had nearly destroyed itself before the Concord had risen. Now, the galaxy was learning what that meant. The humans had been the masters of war, and now they were teaching the Nullborn what it meant to lose. The Phantom Blade and its surviving alien allies watched as the humans executed their final strike. The Nullborn had adapted, deploying new horrors, cybernetic war forms fused with organic matter, drones that hunted by scent and heat, and dreadnoughts equipped with gravity disruptors capable of crushing enemy ships in an instant. Their leaders, once confident in their invincibility, now whispered in secret, debating the nature of their new enemy. Back on Earth, the human warships prepared for their last operation. Commander Soren stood before the War Council, her voice unwavering. "We're ending this." The holographic display showed the Nullborn's capital system, a network of orbiting hives and biofortresses built into the crust of their homeworld. It was the heart of their empire, the place where their leaders gathered to command their war. It was also their greatest weakness. Operation Eclipse was launched under absolute secrecy. Human warships, built from light-absorbing alloys, slipped into the Nullborn's core territory without triggering a single alarm. The Phantom Blade and its alien allies followed at a distance, their sensors blind to the human fleet until they were already in position. Then, the humans struck. They did not waste time with battle lines or prolonged engagements. They deployed seismic charges into the Nullborn homeworld's crust, destabilizing its tectonic core. They launched orbital warheads that collapsed the planet's gravity field, sending its surface into violent upheaval. And as the Nullborn leaders scrambled to escape, a final message was broadcast across every system they had conquered. "You called us animals. You called us extinct. You forgot what survivors are made of." The planet cracked. The capital system fell. The Nullborn Empire, once thought unbreakable, collapsed in less than a day. Some of their forces attempted to regroup, but without central command, they were nothing more than scattered remnants, hunted and eliminated one by one. The galaxy, long shackled by fear, watched in stunned silence as the darkness that had ruled them for so long was unmade. Virex stood on the bridge of the Phantom Blade, her gaze fixed on the burning remains of the Nullborn's homeworld. She had fought her entire life to survive, to hold back the tide of destruction. Now, she watched as the humans did what no species had ever done before. They ended the Nullborn, and they did not do it with mercy. The galaxy would never forget. The stars were no longer silent. Across the remnants of war-torn systems, transmissions flickered to life, some from old Concord colonies, others from independent worlds that had never aligned with any empire. The message was the same in every language. The Nullborn were gone. Their fleets had been shattered, their homeworld reduced to ruin, and their leaders either dead or scattered. The nightmare that had gripped the galaxy for so long had finally ended. Yet, as the survivors emerged from hiding, they found that the victory came at a cost. The humans had not come to rebuild the old order. They had come to ensure that such an enemy would never rise again. The Phantom Blade and its crew watched as human warships moved into former Nullborn-controlled worlds, not to conquer, but to enforce a new reality. Every system that had been under the Nullborn's dominion was mapped, monitored, and secured. The humans did not impose rule, but they left no room for uncertainty. Any resurgence of the Nullborn, any attempt to rebuild their forces, would be met with swift and absolute destruction. On the council world of Aetherus Prime, the surviving leaders gathered. Some wept in relief, others whispered of the price they had paid. The humans had saved them, but they had done so not as saviors, not as diplomats, but as something else. They had not fought like the Concord had. They had not sought peace. They had not offered terms. They had only struck, and they had not stopped until the enemy was gone. One diplomat, a being of crystalline form, spoke in a voice like fractured glass. "They changed us all," she said. "Not just the Nullborn, all of us." Virex stood at the edge of the gathering, watching the leaders debate what came next. She had once been a soldier of the Concord, a commander who had fought to protect a fragile peace. Now, she wore human armor by choice, not as a prisoner, but as a partner. She had seen what they were capable of. She had seen the training, the cold efficiency of their strikes, and the way they moved like inevitability itself. She turned to her brother, the last surviving commander of their old fleet. "You don't trust them." He looked at her, his reptilian eyes narrowing. They let the galaxy burn before they acted. They had the strength, but they waited. Virix exhaled slowly. Because they wanted to see if we were worth saving. She looked to the sky, where human warships moved without banners, without flags. And now, we have to live with what they've become. Back on Earth, Commander Soren stood before a new council of human leaders. The war was over, but peace was not the goal. We don't rule, she said. We don't conquer. We make sure this never happens again. The galaxy had been broken. Now, it would be rebuilt, not by fear, but by the knowledge that humanity had returned. And the stars would never forget what they had done.